Hey guys, it's Kesara, and today I'm going to be talking about the fantasy book series that I want to finally finish this year. So this idea for a video kind of came about for kind of two different reasons. One, because I haven't been reading that much fantasy recently, at least that much new fantasy or new to me fantasy recently. I also just haven't finished the ones that I have read and liked, which is really annoying. So back in 2019, I had this series of goals where I'd had to read like a new fantasy series every month. But what kind of happened is I would read like the first book in the series and just not continue on with it, even though I really enjoyed it, because the next month I had to pick up another fantasy series. In addition to that, there were other series that I picked up like a long time ago that I enjoyed and just never got around to finishing. And there's just a ton of series that I'm in the middle of right now. I'm currently in the middle of well over like 30 book series. So I want to start finishing some of them, and I'm gonna start with the ones that I'm the most excited for, but I'm also gonna start with ones that I haven't read a whole lot of books by these authors before, but the few that I have read, I've really liked. So I've come up with a list of 5 series that I think I could reasonably finish in 2022. So this is the list of the top 5 series that I'm prioritizing the most to finish this year. So the first series I want to talk about on this list is the Raven Shadow series by Anthony Ryan. The books in this series include Bloodsong, Tower Lord, and Queen of Fire. So for this series, I first picked it up back in 2019. I had previously read one book by Anthony Ryan, which was A Pilgrimage of Swords, which was, I think I actually did a full review on that because it was an ebook that I got from NetGalley. It was a novella, so it was like a really short book, but I enjoyed that so much more than I was expecting to because I really like Anthony Ryan's writing style. He writes high fantasy in kind of an almost classical way. He has sort of this subtle, like atmospheric writing style that I just really get into and enjoy so much. So I decided to pick up Bloodsong, and I enjoyed Bloodsong so much. Problem is, I don't remember that much about it because I picked up the first book planning to read the second book right away, but never really got around to it. So it's been almost 3 years now, and I just haven't continued on with the series, and I need to because Anthony Ryan's one of those authors that I feel like I could potentially really love and could be one of my new favorite authors of all time, but I just haven't read enough of his works. So I definitely want to finish this series. I'm probably gonna reread Bloodsong before getting to Tower Lord or Queen of Fire, but I think it could potentially be really good. This particular series is set in kind of like your typical high fantasy world. It's following a boy named Balin Alsorna, who is the son of the king. He's cast out at the age of 10 to become part of the 6th Order, where he basically becomes a warrior. But as he grows up, he kind of feels cheated of his birthright because he's the son of a king. It's just an interesting fantasy series that I could potentially really love that I just want to get back to. So I am really excited to get to this. Probably will get to this later on this year. This is not my top priority, but I'm really excited for it. So the next series that I absolutely want to finish this year is the Broken Earth Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, which includes the 5th season, The Obelisk Gate, and The Stone Sky. So for this series, I've actually read the 5th season multiple times at this point. The first time I picked it up, I think it was back in 2018, which I enjoyed it, but I didn't enjoy it as much as everyone else seemed to. So that kind of turned me off from continuing to read because most people seem to like the 5th season, but not the other 2 as much. And I didn't like the 5th season that much. Later on, I think in 2020, I wanted to reread the series, and I reread the 5th season, and I liked it more the second time around. I actually remember it a lot better from that time than the first time, and I 100% plan to continue on with another 2 books in the series, but it wasn't the best year for me, let's just put it that way, and I just got distracted by a lot of my other responsibilities that I had to do and never got around to finishing the series. And so I think it's finally time to get back to the series. I think I remember the first book in this series very well, so that I don't have to reread it to continue on. So I'll definitely be continuing on with The Obelisk Gate probably relatively soon. Like, I already have the hold on my library for that book, so whenever I get that hold back, I'll be continuing on with it at that point. One thing I like about this series a lot is it's completely different than kind of any other fantasy series that I've read, just because it's set in this post-apocalyptic world. I absolutely love the way the first novel is structured. It's structured in a very interesting way that ends up with a great twist at the end of the first novel. I didn't love it that much as everyone else seems to, but I still really loved the first book. Like, I gave it 4 stars. Like, I enjoyed it immensely. So I'm really excited to see where the other books go. And N.K. Jemisin is an author that I also really want to read more of her works. She has a huge backlog of titles, and I've actually read another one of her books, which was The City We Became, and I enjoyed it a lot. and a lot of people didn't like that one as much as her other works. So I feel like there's a lot of opportunity here for books that I could potentially really, really love, but I think I want to finish this series first out of all of hers, not just because it's the most popular and it's obviously won multiple awards, but I truly think this is a series that could potentially be one of my favorites of all time. The next series that I absolutely want to finish this year is the Riyria Revelations by Micheal J. Sullivan, which includes Theft of Swords, Rise of Empire, and Heir of Novran. So this is another one of those series that I picked up back in 2019. This series is a little bit more lighthearted. This one's a little bit easier to get into than most of the other series on this list. It was just truly a fun series to read. I read the first volume in the Riyria Revelations, which is Theft of Swords, which includes the first 2 books in the series, and then each volume of the series has the next 2 books in the series. And the first book in the series is following 2 characters, Royce and Hadrian, who are basically mercenaries and kind of the things that they do to make money in this world, which is just a great like friendship sort of adventure story that I really enjoyed. And this series in general is just really easy to read and pick up on. It's just so fast paced. So this is probably one I'll probably get to sooner rather than later, just because I feel like I remember the series really well and I like the direction that it's going because it's getting pretty political in interesting ways, but it's very subtle about it. Also, Micheal J. Sullivan is one of those authors where like I own a lot of his books, but I haven't read them. Like the only book I read by him is Theft of Swords, but I probably own like 7 or 8 of books that he has published. Not only this series, but his next series. I think it starts with the Age of Myth. So I need to get started on these because I obviously think I'm gonna like this author a lot just based off of other people's opinions and how much I like the first book that I've read by him so far. I definitely want to read more of his works and I'm really excited to get to this series probably sometime in the first half of this year, so I'll have time later on to get to maybe some of his other books as well. So the next series that I want to pick up is one that I picked up back in 2012, so like a while ago, and I really haven't considered it that much since then, but I actually enjoyed the first book back in 2012, which was just like a weird year for me. I talked about that a little bit in one of my other videos, so I'll link that down in the description if you want to check that out. It was just a really weird year for me, and this was one of the few series that I picked up the first book in that I actually really liked and wanted to continue on with, but just never got around to it. So that series is Phedre's Trilogy by Jacqueline Carey, which includes Kushiel's Dart, Kushiel's Chosen, and Kushiel's Avatar. So this is kind of one of those older series, but it's obviously gotten an update. So this is the book that I bought back in 2012. I'm not gonna lie, I like the new covers a lot more. I just think they're more visually appealing, even though I feel like this maybe fits the story a little bit more. When I read the series, I didn't kind of realize it at the time, but it kind of feels to me, just thinking back to it, it's kind of like how high fantasy meets like your more contemporary atmospheric fantasy, but it's definitely high fantasy. I like the way the author writes, and all of the beautiful descriptions and imagery that she has in this story are just really, really well done. So I really love this author's writing style. I've never read anything else by this author, but she has a lot of books out. So I feel like this author could be one that I potentially really, really like, but it has been quite a long time. The first book, like I said, I read 10 years ago. So it's been a decade since I picked up the series. So I'll definitely have to reread the first book to read the other books in the series, but I believe there are other related series. It's following a girl named Phedre who has this like scarlet mote in her eye, and she's sold into indentured servitude at a very young age, but she is kind of picked up by someone who recognizes the mote in her eye as Kushiel's Dart. And because of that, she's trained as basically a courtesan, which I mean, you could probably tell from these over here, but it's an intriguing political novel with interesting world building and, like I said, just beautiful writing. I want to read it. Like, I want to finish the series. I'll have to reread the first one, but I'll definitely get back to the rest of the books in this series as well. And hopefully I'll end up liking this enough that I can pick up more works by Jacqueline Carey, because I feel like she's an author that I could potentially really love. And the last series that I'm gonna have on this list is by far the most intimidating series, not only on this list, but that I've ever tried to read. And that's Malazan Book of the Fallen by Stephen Erickson, of which I own the first 5 books. I think there are a total of 10. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong about that. But so far, I have read the first 2.5 books in the series. So I've read Gardens of the Moon, Dead House Gates, and I currently am on Memories of Ice. I'm right there in Memories of Ice. So this series is one that I've been wanting to read pretty much forever. I started it for the first time back in 2012 and realized very quickly that I was not ready to read this series. So I restarted it back in 2019 and it was a lot easier to read. I enjoyed it so much more. And I think having that time, like, I think that's like a 7-year gap where I've read a lot of other books in between. I grew my reading level and my ability to read specifically high fantasy novels and epic fantasy, because this is one of the most epic series that I've ever read and I enjoy it a lot. The problem is, it is a very difficult series to read. Like, the actual reading of it is not fun, even though the plot and everything that actually happens is actually really good and is totally worth it, at least from the books that I've read so far in this series. But it's hard to get into, to put a lot of effort when you're reading to keep going and continue reading. I mean, the last couple of years just did not lend to that very well, but I feel like I'm in a place now where I can kind of start over and get back to the things that I've been wanting to do for the longest while, and that includes reading Malazan Book of the Fallen. I do think I'm going to reread the first 2.5 books before continuing on with the rest of the series, and part of the reason why is because I started off reading Gardens of the Moon thinking that I was going to switch between the audiobook and the physical book, but it turns out I actually really love the audiobooks for this series, which is not true for most fantasy series. Most of my fantasy series, I actually kind of prefer the physical books versus the audiobooks, but I actually really love the audiobooks for the series, and because the series is so hard to read in the first place, the audiobooks just make it so much easier. But I kind of regretted reading the audiobooks, especially when it came to Dead House Gates, because a lot of really great things happen in Dead House Gates. I feel like I lose some of the impact when I'm listening to it on audio versus when I take the time and really focus and pay attention reading the physical books. So this is the one series that I'm going to not let myself pick audio up at all, which is like crazy for me because one, I actually really love the audiobooks. Usually the only reason I don't let myself pick up audiobooks is because I don't like the audiobook narrator or I don't like something about the audiobooks. But these audiobooks are fantastic. The narrator is fantastic. Just because of the type of series, it just reminds me of like the first time I was reading A Song of Ice and Fire, for example. I think I would have had a completely different experience if I had read that for the first time on audio versus the physical book. I just want my first time reading this series to be the physical book because I could definitely see myself rereading these multiple times. And because of that, I just want my first time to be physical copies, at least for the later novels, maybe not just the first two, especially Dead House Gates. I read that almost entirely on audio and I really regret it. I'm gonna get back to this series. This is gonna be like my #1 priority this year to actually finish because I really enjoyed it so much back in 2019 when I started it. I think it's finally time to get back to it because I do think it's a series that could be one of my all-time favorite series. Like, it definitely has the potential of being top 5. Because of that, I really want to get to it. I love just how epic and like all the different ideas and concepts that the author brings into the series. And while it's not the easiest series to read, I definitely think it's worth it. So I'm definitely excited to finally get back to this. So that's all I have for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed watching. I post videos on Tuesdays and Saturdays, so consider subscribing. And if you'd like to be notified as soon as I upload, you can click that little bell icon. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up to support my channel. All social media links are in the description down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.